Hey, what's up? It's Kit. Time for another video. Today, we talk about the fishing line that is for your consideration for shore jigging. All right. Now, before we start, we'd like to thank Barracuda Fishing Equipment for sponsoring the series. And this series, obviously, is the Shore Jigging 101 series. Now, Barracuda and I go way back. It has literally 90% of what I have. So whenever you see me talking about major craft, Ripple Fisher, Yamaga, the reels especially, they're all in Barracuda. Okay. So it's kind of like my default shop to go to. And they have the biggest range of JDM equipment here in the Middle East. Now, fishing line. In a nutshell, it's actually very straightforward. Okay, you can use at least an 8x and you balance it out with your rod. Now, as far as balancing it out and there are optimizing it within the limits of the rod, you will find a guide on the rod itself. Okay, so you will find that this particular one is rated for PE 0.8 to 2, and then it has a lure weight of 7 to 35, 10 feet. Okay, it balances out well with the 3000 sized reel. And how I choose the line, it depends on what I want to accomplish. Now, I know that it says PE2 here, but I won't go over PE 1.5 for this particular rod. And if I want power, I will load PE 1.5 on the reel. Okay, if I wanted power. Now, if I wanted a little bit of power and a lot more distance, I would load PE1. And if I want a lot of distance, and let's say I'm quite skilled, and then I could adjust the power, or I'm in an environment with very little snags and I want to be able to cast the maximum distance or have the maximum potential distance that this combo can pump out, I'd put in 0.8. And that is the basic configuration of, or line configuration that you could put in on your combo. So very, very straightforward. Again, for power, you choose 1.5. For a good balance between power and distance, you could choose PE1 and then 0.8. Other people will have other ways of doing it because balancing is a personal preference. So like take for example, for me, I'm quite open about that. For all the types of fishing that I do, I spend more on the reel because I find myself swapping rods as opposed to swapping reels more. Other people would like a cheaper reel. Other people would like a better rod. For me, actually, for me, I have both. Okay? That's the truth of it. I have really good rods and really good reels. What I'm showing you now is something that's not beyond reason. Okay? Which means, for me, I would rather spend, my advice to those that are starting out, okay, is that I would have not a cheap rod, but an okay rod. Okay, so I would buy let's say a rather expensive reel and an okay rod, and that's my combo. While other people would prefer a really good rod and then a cheaper reel. Totally up to you. This is something that's, it's the subjective part of it. Okay. What I have to emphasize though is that the heaviest part of the whole system is actually the reel. And the lighter you go with the reels, lighter in weight, the more expensive they're going to be. Now, if you have, let's say, the rod is light. Let's say even the heaviest rod is still going to be lighter than your reel. And the cheaper you go with your reel, the heavier it would be. So a relatively lightweight rod, mid end, okay, and then a light reel would give you an overall lighter combo than a more expensive rod and a cheap reel. Now, the decision to do that is really up to you. The line is the same thing. You have a standard of 8x. Okay, now 8x is already very smooth. It has 8 carriers or 8 threads that make up the braid. They're a bit bigger than, say, a 14x, which has 14 filaments. Okay, but these filaments are going to be very thin. Now, the difference between an 8x and the 14x, smoothness. Okay, and when it comes to these things, you want the line to be as smooth as possible. However, 8x is cheaper, that's A, and also it's already smooth enough. So whether you want more carriers, it's really up to you. But get the best quality that you can. For me, I use Momoy, YGK on top of the list. Okay, Sunline. All three have their own factories. Now, for me, this is important because if they have their own factories and they're selling their own line, it means that they're, as far as quality is concerned, they're a bit more consistent than those that actually hire factories for their OEM. Okay, so these three are on top of my list. Again, it kind of depends on your area, what is available to you, and each of these companies actually have their own brands as far as what do you call this? The lines are concerned. Now, another brand that I use a lot of, that I have a lot of actually, is Suffix. Okay, I used to work for Suffix, so it just follows that I have a lot of still a lot of reels spooled with Suffix. I have a lot of line. I have a lot of reels because I also used to work with Shimano back in the day. So yeah, I have a lot of reels. I have access to a lot of rods, which gives me kind of like the luxury to swap things around. And what I'm sharing, okay, rods, reels, lines, doors, I have all of that because of work before. But what I'm sharing is actually something that I've experienced myself. And it's really up to you to decide on whether you follow it or not. Obviously, there will be guys in the comment section that will also be sharing their experiences. And it's kind of up to you already to decide. But what I can give you are options. Okay, so now we're actually just explaining what is and what isn't, right? Now, as far as lines are concerned, what I can tell you, and I've used quite a lot, is that the more filaments it has, the rounder it is, and the less it will create friction when you're casting. Now, I know that there are bait casting systems for this, and if you're starting out, don't even go there. Just get this. So for the 7 to 35, okay, you're looking at, let's say, PE1. If you're looking at middle of the road, PE1 will get you very decent distance and also just enough power. Actually, a lot, for especially when you're shore jigging and they're mostly catching like the smaller stuff. When you're using 10 grams, you're not gonna catch a lot of super big fish, but from time to time, you actually have sizable fish that would bite this, and PE1 is strong enough to actually give you a fighting chance. Okay, now just for reference, the PE1 is a diameter, okay, and PE1 is, for if you're strictly going the Japanese what do you call this measurement, PE1 is 20 pounds. It's thin, but it's 20-pound breaking strain line. Now, PE1, Japanese PE1, is very different from what you will find in the States. When you say 20-pound test in the States, it could break at 50. Whereas when you're talking about Japanese PE1, I think after 2010, they kind of agreed on a standard, okay? And that's about 20. it could be 20 max actually. That's how they measure. So a maximum of 20 pounds. And you know what? That's a lot. That is a lot. So again, this is something that potentially can still catch you some decent fish. Now, I've actually caught some pretty decent fish with lower line ratings. And I know someone, he's a different kind of crazy and fishing buddy of ours. It's exclusively targeting 10 kg plus fish on a 2500 reel and 0.6 to 0.4 line, you know. Sifu, hello. And you know, there are people like that and they enjoy the challenge, but you know, he's an expert. You know, this guy literally builds his own rods and fishes with them and catches this, and he's one of those guys that we look up to. And he certainly knows what he's doing. So he has, obviously, it's the reason why I'm telling you this, because he short jigs for them. So as far as the line is concerned, the rod reel line balance is concerned, for him, he has achieved what a lot of us aspire for, and that is being able to really pull out the full potential of his combos. Okay, and he loses a lot. Okay, but I would say 40% of the big fish he catches. That's a very nice percentage, I could tell you that. So thinner line doesn't mean to say that it's actually smaller fish. Okay, contrary to that, actually for shore jigging, you tend to catch a lot of good fish. Okay, so again, PE1, it's 20 pounds. It's not that weak. Okay, it's not weak at all actually. And the potential of catching isn't limited by the strength of your line. It's a lot of factors. All right. So when you're starting out, either go for the optimal balance, which is, let's say, PE1, or you could go PE 1.5, and that'll give you a bit more power. The distance factor would be not as, not as good. You'll be casting closer because the thicker diameter will actually have more friction. So the potential for distance is diminished, but you will end up catching more of the bigger fish because you can tighten up your drag more. Okay, so just be aware of that factor, and that has a lot to do with the line. Okay, so we're looking at least an 8x from a decent brand. Okay, and the 4 brands that I've mentioned have their own factories: Suffix, YGK, Sunline, and Momoy. Suffix is a Taiwanese brand. Okay, well, no, it's a Finnish brand that has a factory in Taiwan. And then these 3, YGK, Momoy, and Sunline, they're Japanese companies. All right. Now, all 4 have very decent lines. And I have used extensively line from 3. Okay, I don't use a lot of Sunline, but I use a lot of Momoy, I have a lot of Suffix, and I have a lot of YGK. So full disclosure. Now, there are other brands like Varias and all this. I also have experience from Varias, but Varias does not have their own factory. And I find that, there's some inconsistencies, at least in my experience. I'm pretty sure that there are a lot that have better experience. It's just, sometimes you get a bad batch. And even with Suffix, and even with, I haven't experienced a bad batch in Suffix, but Suffix I have, okay, but not braid. It was mono. And then Momoy, I haven't. YGK, there was a time, but Varias, I had, quite a few bad batches. And my luck. you know. But Varias, I have a friend, his name is Kozo. I mean, gosh, you know, I guess because his line doesn't have to travel, you know, sometimes that happens, but sometimes it's heat, storage, it could be anything. Okay, but yeah, I mean, he vouches Varias. He's sponsored by Varias actually. So that now, the more filaments that you have, the more rounder it becomes. Now, can you use uh like 6x or 4x? Well, yeah, sure. I mean, they're actually cheaper. The problem is they're a bit rough. So especially when you're using smaller, lighter jigs, and when you reel up, what happens is that it creates like a vibration of sorts. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're used to that already, that's fine. It's just that for some that's actually kind of new, it might bother them. And sometimes the fish actually doesn't really grab and slam the jig. Sometimes they just suck it in, and uh, you'll have the tendency to miss those strikes. But other than that, you know, it works kind of the same. The the more filaments or the more carrier the braid has, the softer it also is. So let's say 131 from Suffix could be softer than 832. As far as the line length is concerned, you need at least 200 meters, and the reels would actually say that. So there are some reels that are that have an connotation, or S mentioned in the spool. And those are mostly, if not all of them, are shallow spools. Now, there's a reason for that. Okay. Remember one of the videos actually, as your line stack decreases, your drag increases, right? So manufacturers have a hack of actually lessening that. And also, it's there to save you money. There are spools of line that you buy that are just 200 meters, and then there are 300. Okay, so depending on what line you load, you check exactly how much your reel spool can hold, because it could be that you have a shallow spool on your reel, and you can purchase a deeper spool for it, and then you can then decide to put in 200 meters of, say, PE1, or 300 meters of 0.8, or you can have PE1 as 300 meters. That's an extra spend, but it's available to you. Okay, so choose to see exactly which one you want or you need. Now, for me, I prefer 300 meter spools, and most of the time, my reels will have 300 meters of line. Now, the reason is because over the course of using your lines, what will happen is that about 100 meters or so would always be used. And that's when you're casting, okay? 100 meters behind that would be the line that you will use when the fish bites and runs. So that's kind of like your usable length. So only 200, okay? Now, here's the thing. When I've used enough, or when I've degraded the line here, the first 100 meters, what I do is reverse the line. When I reverse the line, I would have new 100 meters in front, relatively or rarely used 100 meters in the middle, and my most used on the bottom, which more than likely will not see the light of day again. When that gets used up, then I'll change the line. But guess what? It takes at least like 2 to 3 years before I do that. Okay, because line technology actually it's fairly slow. So the chances of you actually going up with the trend and changing is very kind of low. Okay, let's say Suffix, okay, from 8x to when they've actually introduced the 13x was a really long span of time. I was actually there when the line was introduced, and before it was introduced, we were testing it out. So, the 131. So, you know, the 832 has been there for at least like what, a decade or so, and then after that, 131 came out. Obviously, there were several others um, that came out. They were introduced and then discontinued and all of that. But 832 is kind of like the flagship. And then after that, when 131 was what do you call this was introduced, it became kind of like the top end. So it took like a decade or so for them to actually introduce something new, and that just shows you how long it took before. So as far as rod, reel, and line technology is concerned, you'll have your rod, that the rod technology that changes rapidly, the reel not so, and then the line even longer. So that's basically why I always spend on the reel more than the rod. Now again, that's everyone has their own opinion. A lot of people have their own experiences and all that. So if you subscribe to their way of thinking, go right ahead. At the end of the day, what's very important is you finding the balance. And this is all that I always, that's when I spoke about the reel, when I spoke about the rod, I think I touched up on balance. And that's very important, especially with the line. Now, for me, I have a combo that specializes on distance. Okay. And then I have one that's slightly higher. And I usually don't put in like a heavier version because I would just jump, to the next level, which is like, take for example, for my this is like my tackle system. Okay, you don't have to follow this, but let me at least give you a glimpse. So I would have let's say this is for distance, this is like the balance. Okay, so let's say this is PE 1 and this is 0.8, let's say. Okay, they're not, but this is for distance. Okay, this is for general. So I would have decent distance and decent fighting. And then instead of actually having another rod or reel, and again, let me say this, for a lot of people it's fun and games. For me, it was a job. Okay, so I have and then it kind of became a habit. So over the years, it's like that. So I have this, and I would use 10 to 15 on this. And then this would be 15, 20, let's say, right? And then instead of actually having another 7 to 35 that has thicker line, I would just jump to a 4,000, 5,000, and I would be able to fish up to 60, 80 grams. And then guess what? I'll have the higher bit of line, right? So 1.5, 1.2, 1.5 to 2. So that's just how I do things. At least it'll give you an idea of how I, like what my thought process is when it comes to those things. Now, leaders. Before the leader, actually, let's talk about the knot. Okay, because a lot of people would probably, especially when you're starting out, like guys, learn the FG, learn the PR. Okay, either of those two. I don't care if you want the PR because you want the tool. FG you can tie without a tool. There are tools to tie that, but the transition between braid and leader is very important. Okay, this thing goes in and out of the guides if you're using long leaders, which I do. Okay, there are people like I have a fishing buddy. Kelvin likes shorter leaders. Another difference in our system. Now, there are those that like doing that, but just in case, okay, just in case. Now, the tips on these are actually kind of small, and that makes them kind of fragile. Okay, so they're not that thick. The guides, see, they're now the chances of you breaking that with a bulky knot actually quite big. So even if you have a short leader, just learn to tie the FG or PR and your rod would probably thank you. And that's one of those things. Now, regardless, you have an expensive or a cheap rod, doesn't matter. Okay. At the end of the day, what happens is that if you tie that knot, it's good for you. Okay. You learn that knot, it's good for you. Okay. Now, leaders, for this sort of, what do you call this? For this sort of um, weight class or weight range for jigs, the maximum I would ever tie is 20. Okay. Now, mono, fluorocarbon, whatever you have, doesn't matter. Okay. What you need to know is that mono floats. So there are some jigs that benefit from that. Okay. Here's 10. And then 7 or 8 pounds. So the range that I always use is 8, 10, 15, 20. It really depends. Now, when do I use which? Right? If I'm using slow jigs, I will use thicker leaders. It will give me the most hang time because it'll create a lot more drag. Okay? Fluorocarbon for slow jigs, a disadvantage. It is an advantage for fast jigs, okay? Because fluorocarbon sinks. It has the same specific gravity as water, okay? So it's kind of a disadvantage. A long piece of mono, 20, let's say, floats and gives you drag. So when you're working a place where there's current, it actually gives you an advantage. Okay, so if you're using slow jigs, guess what? Put on a mono leader. The longer the leader, the more hang time you're gonna get. That's an advantage for slow jigs. For fast jigs, you can tie on a short piece of fluorocarbon or a short piece of mono, and bang, you'd be able to work those jigs and swim them more effectively because guess what? You want the responsiveness that every time you jerk, it moves. Okay, fluorocarbon will help a little bit because it sinks. Now, fluorocarbon is also stiffer. So if you want, okay, here's the thing. Because it's stiffer, it will be very difficult for you guys to actually tie knots on. Okay, but fluorocarbon, because the specific gravity is the same as water, what happens is that it also kind of disappears. So for visibility, fluorocarbon will win. However, for usability, it might be hard for those that are starting out. So keep that in mind. I would recommend that you try at least try, okay? At least try fluorocarbon, and then mono is always there. There's 3 types of mono also. There's stiff, okay? There's something in the middle, and then there's soft. Soft monofilament would be very easy for you to tie your knots with and all that, but it's soft. It could also get cut because it has the lowest abrasion resistance, but it's also the one that has the most stretch and, well, it's more forgiving. You know, the stiffer you go, the more abrasion resistance it will be. Okay, or abrasion resistant it would be. So, you know, you'll survive nicks on your what do you call this when it hits rocks, your leader and stuff. It takes a lot more abuse. So the stiffer it goes, the more abuse it can take, but it's also harder to tie knots with. And mono, okay, it's still softer than fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is stiffer. So again, juggle those things. I'm not gonna say that you have to stick with fluorocarbon, but I can tell you this. I have been using mono a lot longer, and I'm very comfortable with using mono. Now, leader size is very important. Now, for me, the majority of what I use is 10 and 15. You can go 20 for this weight if you want. You know, there are instances there were instances where I went really low, like 8, and then there are also instances where I had to use 20. Take these sizes, go to your spot, see exactly what catches you the most fish. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet and say like, oh, you have to use this. It's something that you really have to try out, because sometimes when you're switching from 10 to 8, not sometimes, but all the time, when you're dropping a leader size, you'll catch more fish. Okay, but sometimes it's also not practical, because there are some bigger fish that would bite, or there's just snags, especially when you're fishing around weeds and you need to actually, when you're jig snags on a piece of kelp, for example, or whatever seaweed that's there. It's not snagged like it was snagged on a rock or rope, but you need to pull, and in those instances, a higher rated leader is actually more advantageous, so that is it. Now, if I missed something, you know what, we have a wonderful community that will fill in the details, and I'm very thankful for that. Some of the guys that we have are just awesome, and then from time to time we have assholes mixed in that just make a mess of things. We ban those guys. All right, so yeah, if you have questions, if I missed something, comment section, you know the deal. Okay, so a quick recap before we go. All right, as far as your lines are concerned, get an 8x at least. Okay, 8x, it's smoother, it's rounder, and also choose specific casting line. There's jigging line and there's casting line. Casting line will have a coating that enables less friction when you're casting, giving you a bit more distance. They're a bit more expensive, and also the more carrier there is, normally they're also more expensive. Now, higher carrier lines like 8x, 12x, 13x, 14x, and stuff like that, they have thinner carriers. They're rounder, making them smoother. So you'll have less friction going off the reel, going off the guides, better casting distance. Okay. Now, I have a tip. I mentioned a tip wherein you buy 300 meter spools instead of 200, but you have a choice of doing 200 as well. But with the 200, you pair that up with shallow spooled reels. If you have deep spooled reels, what you could do is load with 300 meters. And then what you could do is, after you used up a lot, or you have damage on the front part of the braid, you could just empty out the spool, reverse the line, and you'll have the back of the line that was attached to the spool up front. Okay, so you reel the used up part of the line, and then what you will have is a brand new section of at least 100 meters, and then the middle is still the same. It would be that 100 or so meters that you don't really use unless you hooked a fish, or you're fishing deeper water, or you're casting out towards deeper water. Maybe you'll have that, but the first 100 meter section of the line is literally the line that you're casting in and out. So if you reverse it, you'll have brand new 100 meters or so of line. And for the middle, you'll have the same section that you only see after the cast or when you hook a fish. So it's actually because the difference between 300 meters and 200 meters is actually quite small. But if you're using it like this, you'll have a bit of longevity on your lines. Obviously, you could also do the same for the 200 meter. But the disadvantage is you'll have the shorter length. Just look at your spool of the reel, right? Now we spoke about leaders, but before that, we also I insisted that you should really learn how to tie an FG or a PR with or without a tool, preferably without a tool, with an FG. Now the FG gives the line and the leader a very good transition. Okay, as far as lines are concerned, I use or I recommend PE1 and 1.5 as a general, or the line that you start out with. Now when you gain a bit more experience, then you can actually put in thinner line like 0.8. But for starters, I would not recommend you going thin. Okay, as far as leaders are concerned, majority of the leaders I use are between 10, 15, and in some cases a shorter piece of 20. Now, as far as leaders are concerned, there's fluorocarbon, there's mono. Hard mono is what I use a lot of these days. And mono is easier to tie leaders onto. Fluorocarbon is stiffer. Fluorocarbon also sinks, and mono floats. So when you're using slow jigs, it's better for you to use mono more than fluorocarbon, because fluorocarbon, well, it sinks, and the more hang time you have with a slow jig, the more the fish would probably respond. Whereas where in areas or in times where you're using fast jigs, a short piece of mono or fluorocarbon will work better. Again, fluorocarbon might be a bit of a challenge for some people to tie leaders onto. So I would recommend you start out with mono and then venture into fluorocarbon when you're kind of experienced in tying your FGs and your chain knots or whatever knot you tie. And we'll talk about that in onto your solid rings, or in some people use snaps, but solid rings for your jigs. If you've learned something, actually, give this video a like. Very, very important. YouTube seems to like that, right? And by the way, I've taken the caps off for now until the first orders are shipped, and more than likely we're gonna change suppliers, and the supplier that we'll have next time would be better. All right, so I'm trying to sort that out. But to help the channel out, the hats are very important. I guess down the line we'll have something else aside from hats. Memberships are a big thing, of course, that supports me directly, that supports the channel, so it enables me to make more of these videos for you guys. And that is it for this video. Thanks so much again to Barracuda for sponsoring this series, and thanks so much for hanging out with me. That's it for this video. See you in the next one. Class dismissed.